This is a very powerful triad in our body that keeps all the pathogens at bay, keeps the iron in regulation. We are endowed naturally with these mechanisms, but they're not taught in mainstream medical education.
In this episode with Morley Robbins, which was super eye-opening, we talk about the massive myth behind anemia and what really causes it, the surge of copper deficiency and what you can do about it, Morley's root cause protocol. And for anybody who struggles with fatigue, chronic fatigue, tiredness, low energy, this one's a must listen. Show notes are at bengreenfieldlife.com/root cause. Let's dive in. I've known about today's podcast guest for quite some time. Never had him on the show. Morley Robbins, he used to be, maybe still is known as the Magnesium Man, but perhaps more popularly of late, he is the creator and the founder of something called the Root Cause Protocol, and even wrote this brand new book that I just got my hands on and just finished reading called Cure Your Fatigue. Notice how the CU in cure, if you're watching the video, is the periodic table of the elements sign for copper, which is a big part of this whole root cause protocol, and maybe how I got kind of interested in it in the first place. But Morley has a pretty cool backstory in terms of how he got into all this after getting his degree in biology. And he's in wellness coaching, he's in nutrition counseling, functional diagnostic nutrition, and has written this incredible book that I think might have some surprises in it for people who are accustomed to the standard ho-hum health and nutrition advice out there. So all the show notes, including a link to Morley's book and website, I'll put at bengreenfieldlife.com/root cause. bengreenfieldlife.com/root cause. Morley, welcome. It's been a long time coming.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, from what I understand, I stalked you a little bit. You used to be like a hospital executive?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So how'd you go from that to this?
Well, I grew up in a very sickly family. Everyone has a backstory. And my mom was an alcoholic. My dad was manic depressive with a schizophrenia. And my sister became a nurse, so I was supposed to become the doctor until I got to college and found out, wow, this is a lot of work. I still applied to schools, but there was very little chance I was going to get in, given the competitive nature of it. But if you can't become a doctor, you go into hospital management because it's just a natural progression. And so I chose to do that. And I worked for hospitals for about 12 years and then worked in consulting firms for 20 years, solving bigger and more complicated problems within the hospital field. And it was a phenomenal 32-year career. And then I developed what's called frozen shoulder. I couldn't pick my hand up above my waist.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of that from tennis, but it went away pretty quickly.
No, this didn't go away. I was miserable.
Okay.
And I went to a health food store that I had frequented for many years in the Chicago area. And they told me to go see Dr. Liz. And I put up my hands. I said, I don't do witchcraft, because I knew that meant chiropractor. And they sold me some supplements. They didn't do anything. I came back a couple months later.
Not that we want to throw all chiropractic medicine under the bus, but that does happen sometimes.
Well, no, but the long story short is Dr. Liz is now my wife. And so she healed my shoulder by correcting the pterygoid muscle in my jaw from the inside, I might add. It was a very painful experience, but as she pressed, my arm went up. It was as close to a miracle as I'd ever been. And what really got me into this work then was she used a phrase I'd never heard in 32 years of working in hospitals. She talked about the innate healer, the healer within. And I looked at her, I didn't say anything. And I thought to myself, if there's an innate healer, I want to find out who that is. Why do we have millions of doctors around the world if there's a healer within? And that's really what the book is about. I think that bioavailable copper and the way we present it in the root cause protocol is, in fact, the mechanism to activate the innate healer.
All right, well, I cannot wait to dive in here. You have on page 32 of the book, you talk about the keys to having more energy. You distill it pretty simply into a 3-step process that I know has a lot of implications and rabbit holes we'll probably get into. But what are the keys, this 3-step process to having more energy?
Well, the real key is recognizing that we need to be able to activate oxygen and turn it into water. And that mechanism, that enzymatic process, is what releases ADP to go over to complex 5 to become magnesium ATP. And so the key is that complex 4, which is where the conversion of oxygen into water, it's actually a stove. Think of your kitchen. You've got a stove. And does the stove know what burner to use? Does the stove know what temperature the oven should be? No. Every stove needs a chef. Well, copper is the chef in cytochrome C oxidase. So the heme proteins, heme A and heme A3, basically become a stove to hold the oxygen, but it's oxygen that is slicing and dicing it so it turns into water. And that is the critical step. And then it moves over to complex 5, which is a nanorotor, as you probably know, spinning at 30,000 revolutions per minute, 500 revolutions per second. And the beauty of our body is we have allegedly 40 quadrillion of these mitochondria supporting our day-to-day activity, which is, I think, absolutely amazing to think about.
And so you're saying copper is kind of an integral part of this mitochondrial production of energy, production of ATP. Would you say copper is like the most important part?
I think, there's, depending upon your sourcing, you might hear about 82 minerals versus 92 minerals. But the way a lot of people talk about them is it's like they're all of equal importance. I don't think that's the case. I think there's a hierarchy. And I think copper is, in fact, at the top. Just because of the unique properties it has by converting oxygen into water, but also its ability to regulate iron and oxygen at the same time. And all of the health problems that we have, Ben, stem from iron-induced oxidative stress. And so it's the copper that keeps those two elements at bay and allows us to have the fullest expression of our physiology.
So iron-induced oxidative stress, like an internal rusting of the body, because
Absolutely.
copper is protective against that type of oxidation, It would basically be the key, and in your theory, for fixing the fatigue that a lot of people deal with, like balancing and modulating copper levels.
Yeah, and again, keep in mind, this is not my opinion. This is a compendium of thousands of articles that I've read, that there are research scientists and clinicians who've come to this conclusion. I've just gone out of my way to make sure people really understand how central this function is in our body.
Yeah. Okay. Let's explore this whole rusting thing. You talk like early in the book about what you describe as the great oxygenation event, which the way I see it might be kind of like the best way to explain how this rusting kind of started in the first place. So what was the great oxygenation event?
Well, it's interesting. Oxygen was not always on the planet. And it's fascinating that several billion years ago, according to the astrobiologists, again, I'm just going to take it at face value that they know what they're talking about. But cyanobacteria began to interact with the sun in the process called photosynthesis. Very, very important part of our life process here on planet Earth. And so oxygen is given off in that process. The oxygen was going into the primordial sea, which was primarily iron and sulfur. And as the oxygen began to build up in the seabed, then it started to go into the atmosphere. And again, according to the folks who've studied it the most, when there was 1/10 of 1% oxygen in the atmosphere, we now have 21%. But when there was 1/10 of 1%, it wiped out 99% of life on the planet because of everything was anaerobic. And the importance of copper, again, this is me just sharing what the scientists have written about. But what copper brought to the equation was three critical chemicals that I think are of utmost importance. We've talked about one of them, the cytochrome C oxidase, which is complex 4 of the mitochondria. Its classification would be it's a multi-copper oxidase. And there's several different forms of that enzyme class on the planet. And that's the class of enzymes that can turn oxygen into water. Very important process on a planet with oxygen. The second critical element that was brought about by copper was, you've heard of melatonin, but it's not just a sleep aid. It's actually the master antioxidant inside our mitochondria. It's a really critical part of our physiology, and it's only possible because of bioavailable copper.
By the way, when you say melatonin is only possible because of bioavailable copper, what's that mean?
Just the mechanism of producing it, the mechanism of its action. And then the third element that I think is always a surprise for folks is to find out that cholesterol was one of the first elements that formed on the planet. And its unique properties, as I'm sure we'll discuss, is that it has the ability to be a sink for oxygen, because it takes 11 molecules of oxygen to make 1 molecule of cholesterol. And it was in 1973 that a famous cardiologist and copper expert named Leslie Clavet, it's a guy, but in 1973, he was able to demonstrate that lack of copper is what was causing a rise of cholesterol in society.
Oh, because if you had less copper, you would need more cholesterol to fight oxidation.
Exactly. You got it. All right. Now you understand cardiology better than most doctors on the planet.
Okay, so I have a super weird question. I don't know if you've ever gotten thrown this on a podcast, but okay, so, and this is going to be a little esoteric for a second, because my religious background is Christianity. And so obviously, like a lot of Christians, I have like more of like a new earth creationist view of the planet, and also the belief in a great flood event. Do you think, and I realize this would require considering that the earth is newer than the billions of years that is often proposed by modern science. Do you think there is some that there's some credence to the idea that some great flood event could have affected atmospheric gaseous conditions and been a potential alternative explanation to the change in oxygen levels that would result in increasing oxidation, and even from like a biblical standpoint, the shortened lifespan that we see in humans in a post-flood environment?
I absolutely think there are many ways to explain what's going on. And I think that the research that I've done the last 16 years has only made me more curious and more open to, are there other explanations for what might have happened? But I think that the bottom line is our physiology, our mammalian physiology, is designed to work with oxygen and iron, and we've got to be able to work with them cleanly so that they don't create static electricity or create rust as we're describing it. And so, yeah, I'm certainly open to that. And like when I'm talking to the Amish in Pennsylvania or Ohio or Indiana, as I have on numerous occasions, they very affectionately refer to me as an evolutionist. And I respect that. That's okay. But what they can't refute is my physiology. They know that within their community, they are rusting out big time. And I think it's a systemic issue around the globe that I think we have to deal with.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think rusting out, and they would imagine like collagen degradation and wrinkles and signs of early aging. But the way that you explain it, if there is increased oxidation, you can see decreased production of ATP in a 14-year-old kid with glowing skin.
Absolutely.
And that could result in fatigue simply because there's not enough energy currency being produced, absent of some kind of external sign of rusting, so to speak.
Completely. And I take a very simplistic view about aging. Aging is just iron accumulation. It is not complicated. And as the iron accumulates in our tissue, it causes this rusting process. And I think the aging community and the longevity community are very slowly coming to that realization. But it was first proposed by Denham Harmon back in 1956. I mean, he was an industrial engineer, PhD engineer, that was fascinated by the rusting process that industry had to deal with, and he decided he wanted to see if it applied to humans. So he became a doctor. Well, he didn't just become a doctor. He went to Stanford to become a physician, and he proposed the free radical theory of aging. And then that was when he was 40 years old. And then when he was 90 years old, he updated his findings in 2006. And basically his theory, his whole concept of free radical theories are the most adopted theories for aging on the planet. It's a very simple process.
So explain this to me. If the buildup of iron would, based on the physiology you've described, contribute to fatigue, why, when someone goes to like a doctor and presents with signs of fatigue, that anemia is one of the things that's proposed as a cause, like which would be low iron levels, for people familiar with the diagnosis like that, or largely thought of as low iron levels. So like, why is it that anemia is thought to be the cause of fatigue? And is it a problem that people are then taking iron?
I've just done 2 online courses about this very topic. One is just a more basic version, but one's a deeper dive. One's 90 minutes, one's 3 hours long. But to answer your question directly, a lot of confusion about anemia. And the real issue is we're using a blood test and we're extrapolating to the tissue. So low iron on a blood test does not perfectly represent the tissue level of iron. And Bruce Ames, famous physiologist at Berkeley for many years, at the peak of his career, he was the most quoted scientist on planet Earth. But in 2004 and 2005, he was able to prove that there's 10 times more iron in the tissue than shows up in the blood. And so the confusion that we have on the planet is that if you want to adopt the position of the World Health Organization, they'll tell you that 1/3 of the world's population has anemia, some form of iron deficiency anemia, or anemia of chronic inflammation, or one of the other subsets of anemia. But they'll tell you that 1/3 of the population is struggling with iron. Well, here's what we have to believe. First of all, iron is the most dominant element on planet Earth. Number one, 36% of the Earth's composition is iron. And I'd like to think that humans are the most evolved species. My opinion shifted a little bit in 2020, but let's still go with the assumption that the people are still the most evolved species. And so in order to accept anemia, it means that the most evolved species has lost the ability to metabolize the number one element on the planet, and it doesn't pass the sniff test. And the part that's missing in this conversation is the copper protein called ceruloplasmin.
Ceruloplasmin.
Okay. It's one of the largest proteins in the human body, 1,046 amino acids. When it was first discovered, there were 8 atoms of copper inside it. And over the last 60 years, almost 70 years, we're down to 6 coppers. Some scientists suggest it might only be 5.
Are you saying that we have lost those 3 to 4 copper ions in ceruloplasmin, or when it was originally discovered, it was improperly quantified?
No, I'm just saying that from 1948 to 1975, ceruloplasmin always had 8 coppers in it. Then in 1975 to 2000, it had dropped to 7. And then in 2000 to the current day, it's down to 6. And I've read in 3 articles now, well, it might only be 5. So picture driving a V8 and having a cylinder go out every few miles. That's what's happening to humanity.
Okay, so you are saying that basically the average level of copper in ceruloplasmin as measured in human beings over the past several decades has decreased.
It's in the literature. It's documented.
Okay, got it. So it's not as though we've found out better ways to somehow visualize or measure ceruloplasmin, and we've realized, well, the copper that we thought in it is lower. It's that levels are actually decreasing.
And I've talked to a handful of copper researchers and said,
okay,
what the hey? And no one can tell me. No one has it. They don't know what's behind it. I'm like, okay, it's just, we live in a very entertaining environment, as you well know. And so what's important for people to understand is how central this protein is to our well-being. And so the model for big pharma is one gene, one protein, one function. That's what really drives the big pharma business model.
One gene codes to produce one protein, and that one protein has one function.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so for ceruloplasmin, there is one gene. It's the ceruloplasmin gene. But it produces 9 enzymes. There's 9 different functions that ceruloplasmin can engage in. So it's basically a transformer. And what I find wildly entertaining is that in medical school, doctors don't learn any of this. They don't learn that there's 15 different substrates for ceruloplasmin.
And what's a substrate again?
It's an element that the protein can work with.
Okay.
And so it can work with iron and oxygen and work with copper and can work with catecholamines, and it can work with amines and polyamines. And it's just like, we need to be mindful of this. This is a very powerful part of our physiology that is kind of pushed off to the side in conventional medicine. And in fact, if you really want to get into the nuance of it, so there's a team of Russian scientists headed up by Basil Vasilyev. Ceruloplasmin actually works with lactoferrin and myeloperoxidase. This is a very powerful triad in our body that it basically keeps all the pathogens at bay, keeps the iron in regulation. And so we are endowed naturally with these mechanisms, but they're not taught in mainstream medical education. And so it's just, we are constantly being exposed to workarounds because no one knows about the central importance of bioavailable copper.
Okay, so back to the anemia piece, which got us on the ceruloplasmin kick in the first place. What you're saying is, if I go to the doctor, they test my blood levels of iron, that doesn't necessarily mean I don't have high tissue levels of oxidizing iron, and that the reason I would have low blood levels but high tissue levels would be a result of some type of ceruloplasmin deficiency or some way that's not working properly?
That's one factor. It's more likely that what I've learned more recently, Ben, is that if we have any kind of chronic stress, do you know anyone who has chronic stress?
Yeah, a few people. Yeah.
Just a few people, right? Like most of the planet. In the presence of chronic stress, the 2 stress models that are used in science are chronic social defeat stress and repeated restraint stress. Well, that's what 2020 was.
I don't know what either of those are. Chronic social defeat stress and restraint stress.
Just go back 5 years and see what was life like when we were first confronted with the insanity of 2020. We felt socially defeated, and we felt constrained about what we were allowed to do. But what they've discovered is that social state, that stressful state, triggers a response in the immune system, and we produce higher levels of what's called interleukin-6. It's a very important part of our innate immune system. And interleukin-6 causes a rise in a iron hormone called hepcidin. Ceruloplasmin would be the positive regulator of iron metabolism, and hepcidin is the negative regulator of iron metabolism. There's a big difference between positive regulation and negative regulation. To use a sports analogy, a quarterback is a positive regulator. A middle linebacker on the defense is a negative regulator. They shut down plays. And so it's important to know that these mechanisms exist, But if hepcidin is rising under stress, it's going to cause what's called iron sequestration. The body is designed to pull that iron out of the bloodstream into what are called recycling macrophages. Very, very important part of our physiology, because the body knows that if the iron is available, the pathogens will use it, and then you're going to have a more significant infection. So stress is going to be a major contributor, but just any kind of pathogenic stress, any kind of exposure to pathogens is going to cause this sequestration of iron. And it's going to look, the iron is going to look low on the blood test, when in fact it's not revealing what's happening at a tissue level. And the part that's usually missing in most people's awareness is that we have a very sophisticated turnover of iron in our body every day. Every second of every day, we have to replace 2.5 million red blood cells. Got to take 2.5 million offline.
Yep.
Got to bring 2.5 million online. And that is the synchronized work of the spleen working with the bone marrow. Spleen's breaking them down. Bone marrow is bringing them back online. And there's a tremendous flux of iron that needs to take place. And every 24 hours, we need to make 200 billion red blood cells. And that requires 25 milligrams of iron. It's not very much, but it's significant. But the important part for your listeners and followers is that 24 of those 25 milligrams comes from this recycling system. Only 1 milligram is supposed to come from our mouth. And what's happened in modern society is they flipped the narrative, and they want people eating upwards of 20, 30, 40, 50 milligrams of iron, because we have a very iron-fortified diet. And the body can't assimilate all that iron, so it gets put into storage, into tissue. And that begins to throw off the elegance of the iron physiology.
Okay, I want to ask you about iron fortification in a second, but coming back to hepcidin, just so I understand this correctly. So we're in a state of stress,
Yep.
and it could be social stress, environmental stress, pathogenic stress, etc. Hepcidin would upregulate, and thus more iron would get sequestered in the tissues. The blood levels would, if we were to be tested, would be low. And the more iron sequestered in the tissues would allow for us to do something like fight off infection better?
That's a great question, Ben. It depends on how strong your immune system is. It's a wonderful insight because we can have pathogens both intracellularly and extracellularly. So what this conserved response is dealing with the extracellular pathogens. So let's get the iron out of the blood, which is extracellular, and get it into the recycling macrophages. Then you have the possibility of parasites and other pathogens building up in the intracellular medium, in the actual macrophages. And so ideally, we've got to be able to handle both the extracellular and intracellular flux of iron. And the important thing for you and your listeners to understand is that anytime you need to move iron in the human body, copper's got to be nearby. Copper is going to be the mechanism to open the doorways to allow the flux to take place.
Okay, so you're saying like a copper dysregulate or copper imbalance would result in dysregulation between action of hepcidin and ceruloplasmin, and thus we wouldn't be moving iron efficiently between intracellular and extracellular environments.
That's exactly right.
And chronic stress is what could cause that to happen.
It's been proven to cause it. Absolutely proven to cause it. And what we're facing is not just the chronic stress, but we're facing the shortage of copper and other minerals in our diet. I mean, we live on a very compromised environment.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people are going to wonder, what I'm wondering, which is where we replace the copper. But before we get to that, you said, when you talked about iron, you said we get a lot of iron, but you specifically said iron fortification. And I want to know more about that because, I consume red meat. I have, some iron-rich sources of vegetables. I don't personally supplement with iron But is there a difference in the type of deleterious oxidation and iron accumulation that would occur from, say, iron fortification and iron supplementation versus, let's say, a person who's having like a grass-fed, grass-finished, like ribeye steak and maybe some liver a few times a week?
Right. So the important thing to understand is there's heme, which is animal iron, heme,
Okay.
and non-heme. Heme is considered organic. Non-heme is inorganic. They don't want us eating the meat. You know that. I know that. It's pretty, I mean, they're going out of their way to try to make it fearful to eat animal meat. But the accessibility of iron in that situation is far easier to work with than the non-heme iron. And when you get into the research around it, it's absolutely fascinating because 95% of how we access iron would be through this organic flux. But what they want us to believe is that 95% of it is coming from fortification. And so a lot of confusion around that. And the key is that everything really changed in 1941 when England and Canada and the U.S. started to add iron filings to the food system, to the wheat flours, where they first started it.
Now, you said that in a very odd way. People hear iron fortification, and that sounds good. Adding iron filings sounds disturbing. I guess what are iron filings?
Iron filings are the most inorganic form of iron you can possibly have, and this is profiled in the book "Iron: The Most Toxic Metal" by Jim Moon, he was a PhD iron toxicologist who passed away in 2016. So people don't realize what the food system has done. And what's also important to know is that, so we have this watershed event in 41. In 1969, the FDA sought to increase the iron level in food fortification by 350%. Wow, we're going to increase it 3.5 times. And that led to 20-some scientists from around the world, iron toxicologists, coming to Washington, D.C. with one question. What are you trying to do? Kill people? And so in a magnanimous gesture, the FDA backed off and only increased it 50%. What's important to know is that there are 9 different forms of iron being added to the U.S. food system, and all 9 have been classified as carcinogens.
And are all 9 of those non-heme forms of iron?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm assuming non-heme and the bioavailability of that, or the way that that's utilized being different, would mean there would be a higher risk of it building up in the tissue or creating some type of an iron imbalance versus heme iron, which would be better metabolized or something like that.
Right. Exactly. And so that they're actually, and I don't want to get too detailed because I'm going to lose your listeners.
They're smart cookies.
Okay, well, they're separate doorways. They're separate doorways. They're separate doorways for heme and non-heme.
Okay.
They're separate exit doorways for heme and non-heme. And it's important for people to realize that the research is obsessing about the non-heme side, and they're just ignoring the heme side, which I think is a mistake, in my humble opinion. But the part that people are not aware of is there's 0 copper fortification in our food system. There's 0 magnesium fortification in our food system. There's 0 retinol fortification in our food system. And so we are exposed to constant additions of iron and calcium and vitamin D, but no one's talking about their parallel nutrients that are critical because they have a yin-yang relationship.
Yeah, and we know what copper is. A lot of people know what magnesium is. Retinol, I believe that's a form of vitamin A, if I'm not mistaken.
Animal-based A. Yeah.
And what's the link between the cholesterol piece that you talked about earlier and retinol when it comes to this equation?
Just that in September 1955, Eisenhower has a heart attack, and Ansel Keys seizes on that moment. And he gets people to believe that, it's cholesterol that's causing the heart attack. And so we put everyone on a low-fat diet. So when you go low-fat, you're going to not ingest retinol along with the cholesterol. And so what people didn't know, I didn't know this until I started to really get into the research. In order to make copper bioavailable, you must have retinol in your diet. And retinol is an essential part of the mechanism there are two critical copper pumps in our body. One's called ATP7A. It's called the Menkes gene. The other's ATP7B, the Wilson's gene. Well, those two genes produce proteins that can only be activated by 13-cis-retinoic acid, which is a hormone derivative of retinol. So if you don't have retinol in your diet, you can't get to the 13-cis-retinoic acid. You can't activate the pumps. You can't load copper into the copper enzymes that are critical for the physiology of our body.
Okay, so this is back to the cholesterol sink piece. As you describe cholesterol as being protective against oxidation, it would be low cholesterol equals low retinol equals copper dysregulation equals oxidation by iron.
There you go. We should drop the mic right now.
Almost. Well, we're not done yet. Okay, so I'm assuming part of this is like, don't be fat phobic, consume good dietary sources of fat. I'm assuming part of this is, take adequate levels of magnesium. I'm assuming a big part of this is like avoid foods fortified in iron, which would mean cutting out a lot of processed and ultra processed foods, which is a good idea generally.
Exactly.
Maybe don't take an iron supplement.
Right.
And then the copper piece, that might be a little bit lesser known to a lot of people. Like, where do you actually get copper?
I will answer that question, but let's make sure people are aware of the medical meme that runs medicine around the world. And that is, you're anemic and you're copper toxic. Those are two dominant thought processes that are constantly being pumped out in the airwaves.
Yeah. Well, I hear anemic a lot. I don't hear copper toxic as much.
Oh, it's it's very, very pervasive. And so they want us to be afraid of the very element that regulates iron. And they want us to believe that we can take as much iron and not be worried about it. A good rule of thumb for how much iron you have in your body is to take your age and multiply it times 365. This is not my formula. This is the formula that the iron biologists like Robert Crichton and Douglas Kell and people of that stature, these are the megastars in that world of iron researcher. That's what they use. So I'm going to be 73 in a couple weeks. So I've got about 27,000 milligrams of iron in my body. Well, men are designed to run on 5. So I've got a multiple of iron. And so the iron footprint is what we've got to mitigate, and we've got to begin to introduce the copper at the same time to bring the physiology back into balance. So then to come to your question, historically, the food sources of copper would have been organ meats.
Okay.
And shellfish.
Okay.
Nuts and seeds.
Like all nuts and seeds, or like, are there specific ones higher?
Well, cashews are particularly high.
Great. You didn't even know this. It's a key ingredient in a new ketone-based energy bar I just developed. So there we go. You just did free advertising for me. Okay, cashews.
That's fine. And then we've got leafy greens like mustard greens, collard greens, beet greens. They historically, again, we're talking historically, were very rich in copper. Unfortunately, we live in a post-glyphosate world. Roundup is worldwide now. Roundup is in the air. It's not just on commercial farms. Proof of that came in 2022 when a study was done in France. Now, mind you, the French were very opposed to the introduction of glyphosate in Europe. They were very resistant to that.
Might mess up the flavor of the Bordeaux or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
99% of French citizens are peeing glyphosate in their urine. That was sort of a bellwether study that sent a shockwave around the world that glyphosate is in the air and in the rainwater. And so it isn't just, even organic foods now are subject to this event.
So what's that have to do with copper?
Well, it means we have compromised sources of copper.
Oh, so you're not saying like the glyphosate would somehow, maybe it does, I don't know, impair copper balance. What you're saying is, well, all these copper rich foods, you're getting some of the other, whatever, gut damaging effects of glyphosate or some of the neurological issues associated with glyphosate if you're going out of your way to eat a bunch of non-organic dark leafy greens and, whatever, meat from cattle that are eating things that have been sprayed, et cetera?
Well, actually, it does affect the availability of minerals in general. But let me introduce a thought before I get there. It's important for people to know that again, take the time machine back to 2020. A lot of people are doing what's called the COVID cocktail. And that was high doses of ascorbic acid, high doses of vitamin D, and high doses of zinc.
I did that.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
It's the perfect triad to kill the bioavailability of copper.
Oh, shit.
And so it was April of 2020 that I renamed what COVID stood for. So COV stands for copper's vanished, and ID stands for iron's dysregulated.
Oh, man.
And so the research that it would be important for you and your followers to know about was in 1928, 2 separate studies, March at the University of Wisconsin, May at the University of Kentucky, where they purposely withheld copper from the animal's diet, and the liver filled up with iron. They've known this since 1928. It's a very well-established biological fact that copper is instrumental for regulating iron in the animal's body. It's a very, very central function that a lot of scientists have known. It's just not taught in one place, medical school. And so back to your point about the impact that glyphosate has on minerals. There's a famous scientist named Don Huber. He's in retirement now, but he's at Purdue University. And he studied glyphosate for the last 30 years of his career. And he studied the speed with which minerals are chelated from the soil being exposed to glyphosate. So you're familiar with earthquakes. An earthquake of 3 is, dishes rattle, but no one dies. An earthquake of 12, no one survives that. So what Dr. Huber was able to document, and he's done several studies to this, that glyphosate is pulling calcium and magnesium out of the soil at a speed of 3. It's pulling iron and zinc out of the soil at a 9.
Yeah, you're going to tell me copper's a 12, right?
Copper's a 12.
Yeah.
And so here's the significance of that. That means that copper is coming out 1 billion times faster than calcium and magnesium, and 1,000 times faster than iron and zinc. Now, here's the problem we've got, Ben. When I was in college, my mom had a Mercedes 350 SL, and I drove that car in Florida twice the speed limit. I was going 140 miles an hour. It was a wall of green going past. By the grace of God, I didn't get caught, but that was twice as fast. When I was a little boy, a guy named Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier, and he was going 10 times the speed limit, went 750 miles an hour. You and I don't know what 1,000 times faster or 1 billion times faster is. And what we tend to do is, well, I don't really understand that, so it can't be that important. No, this is very, very, very important. And what's happened, Ben, is we as a species have become Swiss cheese because we're missing minerals and our nutrients, and we're eating Swiss cheese because the food is missing the nutrients.
Yeah, maybe French cheese.
Okay, but
yeah.
But the point is we have a compromised diet and we have a compromised physiology, and the whole purpose behind this book is just to wake people up to this reality that minerals are critical for our physiology, but especially copper and magnesium, because we're seeking to make energy to respond to the stress that we're constantly under.
Okay, so obviously a major takeaway from that TED Talk on herbicides and pesticides is if you're going to choose these copper-rich sources that you talked about, select the source carefully. But then what about, I have two follow-up questions related to that. Copper supplementation, like can you just buy and supplement copper? And then also, I hear bee pollen is a really good source, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on bee pollen.
We highly recommend bee pollen and like rice bran. Again, but it's with the acknowledgement that to some extent that particular source of nutrients, bee pollen, has been compromised. Everything's been compromised now.
Well, actually, no. So I interviewed the people, and this is not a commercial. They're not like sponsoring this podcast, but I interviewed Carly from Beekeepers Naturals, and they source all of their bees now in Europe in totally non-sprayed environments. Because the issue with organic in America is in many cases the bees are just traveling to a bunch of inorganic sprayed farms. But they have a source in Europe. So I know Beekeepers Naturals, according to them, like they have a clean version of a bee pollen.
That's beautiful. That's exciting. I think it's important that people recognize that the study in 2022 would suggest that glyphosate is more prevalent than we want to believe. And certainly the research that Stephanie Seneff has done certainly has implicated a lot of chronic problems are stemming from, she'll refer to glyphosate in her writing. She doesn't get down to the copper level until you're face to face. It's a different story.
Okay, got it. Now, what about copper supplementation? Like, do companies sell like a good form of copper that you could take if you just don't have good dietary sources?
One of my contributions to society was to make a copper supplement in 2021.
I didn't just throw you a softball, by the way.
No. But the whole key, though, is I want people to realize that the name of the supplement we came up with, or that I inspired, is called Recuperate. So
that's great.
But the point is that is a bioavailable form of copper. Just taking a copper supplement isn't enough. You've got to be able to have the nutrients that copper's looking for.
Oh, you mean like this would be called like cofactors in the supplement industry?
Absolutely. And so copper is a fat soluble mineral. It loves to be in the medium of fat. And in order to metabolize fat, you have to have copper in your physiology. That's the yin yang of copper. There's a copper fat axis and there's an iron sugar axis. And so they've been dumping us full of sugar, knowing that it's going to build up iron in our body. What's been missing has been the copper and the fat for decades.
Interesting. By the way, the iron sugar axis, I'm going to hypothesize that has something to do with sugar shifting you into a more anaerobic state and increasing the amount of iron saturation in the tissue.
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
You got it.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So, the last thing about copper that I'm wondering is, can I get some kind of a blood test or some type of evaluation that tells me, like, gives me an accurate picture of my copper values? And I guess I should throw in there, because people are going to wonder, ditto for iron, if blood is giving you an inaccurate representation.
What I cobbled together is what's called the full Monty iron panel. It's nothing. What's unusual about it was to introduce copper markers and zinc and vitamin A and vitamin D into a fairly standard iron panel. And you can order it, any individual can order it from a website called requestatest.com. And I've trained about 1,000 people now in the root cause protocol. And so there are people out there that can help you introduce it. But what I would propose is that if you decide you want to do that, I have no control over the cost. It's $275. But if you decide to do it, I would love to interpret the results. We can either do it offline or online, depending on how you want to approach it. But I think you'd find it fascinating to see what your body is revealing. And it's the interaction and the interpolation of those markers where I can begin to get a sense of what level of oxidative stress could be taking place inside your body. And I imagine, given your commitment and focus, it's going to be a different level than what I typically see with a lot of people that I work with.
Yeah, maybe. Is that a blood test?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. What about the, you hear a lot of practitioners now using hair for like a mineral analysis. What do you think about that?
No, I've worked with hair tests for 16 years.
Because I'm assuming the blood test that you just talked about, if you say it's all iron, it's not going to tell me copper, or it does?
No. The blood test is going to help you. There are multiple media for discerning what's happening at a nutrient level in the body. You can use blood, you can use urine, you can use feces, and you can use hair. Those are the typical sources. The hair is very, very easy medium to work with. Here's the beauty is its simplicity, but there is a downside to it. And again, I've worked with a hair test for 16 years now. The beauty of the hair test is it will tell you right away if you're dealing with stress, because you're going to get back a saber-toothed tiger report of different levels of minerals throughout the hair sample. But where I think the hair test really shines is there's a way to measure whether the body is in fact able to make energy in the face of that stress. There's an adrenal ratio and there's a thyroid ratio. Adrenal ratio is the ratio of sodium to magnesium, and the thyroid ratio is calcium to potassium. And those are very helpful to get a sense of what's the energy producing capacity of this individual.
So it's not just levels, it's the ratio.
Yep. Ratios are very, very important in mineral analysis. And here's the part that a lot of people don't know about with the hair test. They do measure the metals, especially the zinc, copper, iron, and molybdenum are the four principal metals that they're going to look at. Excuse me, manganese. But they also do measure molybdenum. But the first thing they do with a hair sample is they burn it. It's the very first thing they do. I've been to the labs. I've watched them do it. And so what that does is it oxidizes the valence of that metal. Well, zinc is unique and only has one valence. It's +2. Copper has at least 3. Iron has at least 4. And manganese has 6. And so everything gets frozen to a +2 valence. And we don't get a complete understanding of what's happening inside the body. The other thing that you can't do with a hair test, Ben, is you cannot measure ceruloplasmin in a hair sample. It does not show up in a hair test.
Is that blood, ceruloplasmin?
Yeah, only in the blood. Got to do it in the blood.
Is that part of the iron panel that you run? Do you have ceruloplasmin on that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And again, back to the ratio, it was some hematologists from Harvard back in 1960. It's a very entertaining series of studies they did, nine different studies of ceruloplasmin. They chose to do the research at Bell Laboratories in upstate New York, not in Cambridge, Mass. I've never understood why they did that, but what they introduced the world to was the ratio of copper to ceruloplasmin is very, very important. And the great scientists of the 1930s have studied these metals very carefully, and they were very clear that zinc and magnesium and copper and iron should all be at 100 in the serum. So the copper, the zinc, and the iron should all be around 100. And these are based on numerous studies by numerous scientists back in the day. And then the ideal for ceruloplasmin should be 30, and the ratio should be 3.33. And when there's a deviation from that, that's when you begin to get into the nuance of what's going on in the person's world.
Okay. And I assume your test results give those ratios.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So you have a really intriguing page in the book. And by the way, just so you guys know, if you go to bengreenfieldlife.com/root cause, I'll put some helpful show notes to you and links for the things Morley and I are talking about. But we are, just so you know, we're an hour in and we've covered maybe 20% of the book. So if you want the full meal deal, read the book. But I really like this chapter or this page where you go through what a suggested daily schedule would look like for the root cause protocol. And I'm assuming you might even do this in your own life. So walk me through the supplements that you're taking to balance things out and why you're choosing specific items. We don't have to take a deep dive, but just the general overview of what a day in the life of the root cause protocol looks like to balance out, the copper issues, the iron issues, the ceruloplasmin, everything we've talked about so far.
So the whole basis of the protocol is that it's built around stops and starts. And there's about a dozen different nutrients that we tell people to stop taking, like stop taking iron, stop taking calcium, stop taking zinc, stop taking supplemental D. And those are very controversial, but we can back up the reason why we take that stance. But then what you're referring to is the daily schedule that we've developed over the years, just to give people a guide for how to introduce these critical nutrients into your routine so you begin to get the full benefit of having bioavailable copper and having balance in your minerals. And what we're really doing in the initial stages, we break it down into phases. We have phase 1, 2, 3, and then we have what's called phase X, so that people doing what you're doing right now, this very regular, steady movement. That's very, very helpful. Get out in the sun, things like that. But the goal of phase 1 is to really begin to address the prevalence of mineral imbalance in most people's body, because people have not been aware that minerals are the spark plugs of life, and they are. And so we're bringing the adrenal glands back online. We have an adrenal cocktail that we developed that introduces sodium and potassium and magnesium, along with vitamin C, just to nourish the critical glands that rest on top of our kidneys and get them back in the game of dealing with the stress. But then we're also introducing, like the copper is the last component of that phase 1. But we're trying to get people focused on real food wherever possible, food-based supplements wherever possible, and do it in a phased format so that they're not overwhelmed by the process of transitioning from the conventional worldview to, you made reference in some of the wording that you use that I had created the protocol. Well, actually, I like to think of it as Mother Nature created the protocol. I just happened to dust it off.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, you did say whole foods. I'm reading right now. Whole food vitamin C, whole food vitamin E.
Correct.
You said whole food supplements. What's a whole food supplement versus an average everyday supplement?
Yeah. So with vitamin C, we've been trained to believe that ascorbic acid is vitamin C. And so vitamin C, the whole vitamin C complex, is like your car, where it has an engine, a steering wheel, 4 wheels, and a cover. That's the design of the whole food vitamin C complex. Ascorbic acid is just the cover of the car and no moving parts. So it's a very different complex than what we've been led to believe. The vitamin E, typically what they'll sell you is alpha tocopherol, when in fact there are 4 tocopherols and 4 tocotrains, and very often there's selenium at the core.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this would be like, I did an interview with Dr. Barry Tan, and he described like the difference between synthetic vitamin E and like taking a natto plant extract, which is the 4 tocopherols and the 4 tocotrienols.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so the Mother Nature designed those vitamins that way for a reason. The interplay of those parts. And what's important for people to know is that everyone that knows about ascorbic acid would assume that it was Albert Szent-Györgyi who got the Nobel Prize for discovering ascorbic acid. Well, that's not at all what happened. But the important point is that he got the Nobel Prize in December of 1937. He wrote an article, a letter to the editor, Nature Journal, in July 4th, 1936. And I have the letter in my files, and he made a very clear statement. He said, ascorbic acid does not cure scurvy. He was not working with ascorbic acid. He was working with hyaluronic acid, and he was working with Hungarian peppers, which have the whole complex. And so the world has been led astray by this deception around ascorbic acid versus the whole food vitamin C.
Okay, so if you're taking vitamin C or vitamin E, look for the whole foods version.
Absolutely.
You, of course, have magnesium on there. Right. Rice bran, that's the rice bran and bee pollen. Those are probably listed as forms of copper, huh? And liver also?
Well, actually, they're rich sources of B vitamins.
Oh.
And so
copper or just B vitamins?
Well, I would argue that the copper is probably woven in there.
Okay.
had a conversation with Dr. Clave many years ago, and I said, my theory is that all of the B vitamins require copper so they can regulate iron. And he said, well, Morley, that's a great theory. He said, I can't speak for all of the B vitamins. He said, but what I will tell you for a fact is that folate, B9, is copper dependent. And when you understand the role of folate in our physiology, that's a very profound piece of information that totally changes our understanding of vitamin A and vitamin D metabolism in the body.
Yeah. And, looking at this, it seems like it's something someone could pretty easily stack onto, their current diet. Take magnesium, cod liver oil. A lot of people have access to that. Some kind of trace mineral, bee pollen, beef liver. I know a lot of people don't like it, but you can take capsules. Even though I like to cook it, I love beef liver steaks. Rice bran, diatomaceous earth, a couple times a day, this adrenal cocktail that you mix in fresh squeezed orange juice or water. Like, it seems like you wouldn't have to, this isn't a doom scroll for people to like overhaul everything. It's like, stop taking a certain number of things, start adding these in.
Right.
And then the last thing I was going to kind of ask you that I was wondering about related to iron, what about like giving blood to jumpstart the process? Do you have an opinion on phlebotomy like that?
Yeah, we regularly recommend that.
Okay.
What we really are proposing is that we need to lower the iron footprint in our body, and we need to raise the copper footprint in our body. And you and I have a very different profile than our great-grandparents. I can assure you that they were eating different food than what we eat. I mean, I think you have a tremendous discipline and rigor about yours, but the average person they're not eating the types of foods that their ancestors ate. And so the ability to release the iron from the body to lower the oxidative stress. And so the whole concept of cure your fatigue was based on the work of Douglas Wallace, who's a famous geneticist at Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania. He wrote a very important article in 2005 where he was challenging his clinical colleagues and his scientific peers. He said, you all don't seem to understand how energy is made in the body, and how if the oxygen doesn't become water, you have an opportunity cost. You can't recover that oxygen. You've got to neutralize that oxygen or that oxidant. And so if we don't turn the oxygen into water, we suboptimize our production of energy. And there we have what he called cellular energy deficiency. Well, fatigue is a little easier to say. And it turns out that there are 20,000 symptoms that are profiled in the Merck manual. And guess what they all start with? Cellular energy deficiency. That's the focal point of every condition.
Wow. And I mean, this is new stuff for a lot of people who have heard like take an iron supplement, pop a bunch of vitamin D. But, in reading over your book, like, I finished the book 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
I've definitely got some things to experiment with, and I'm sure some people are going to want to do this test to see where they're at. And some people are going to have questions, comments, feedback. I'll sit down after this and, help make the show notes nice and juicy for you. If you go to bengreenfieldlife.com/root cause. The book's not super hard to read. I think if you really want to take the deep dive, you can get through this in a week or less. I think it's worth looking into. Morley, this is fascinating stuff. And I want to thank you for coming on the show and for doing the work that you do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share it. And what I think is important in this particular edition of the book is we've taken a deeper dive around the copper. We've introduced a whole chapter on women's health, which a lot of people don't realize all revolve around this copper iron crisis. But the footnotes that are there are ones that you could hand this book to a doctor and say, if you want to understand copper, here's the book to do it.
Yeah, very well researched, 290 references. So worth checking out, you guys. Here's what it looks like. Cure Your Fatigue. It's now available on Amazon. Pretty new, second edition. bengreenfieldlife.com/root cause is where I will put the show notes. Morley, thanks so much, man. This is good stuff.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, folks, I'm Ben Greenfield along with Morley Robbins, signing out from bengreenfieldlife.com. Have an incredible week.
Do you want
free access to comprehensive show notes, my weekly roundup newsletter, cutting edge research and articles, top recommendations from me for everything that you need to hack your life, and a whole lot more. Check out bengreenfieldlife.com. It's all there. bengreenfieldlife.com. See you over there. Most of you who listen don't subscribe, like, or rate this show. If you're one of those people who do, then huge thank you. But here's why it's important to subscribe, like, and or rate this show. If you do that, that means we get more eyeballs, we get higher rankings, and the bigger the Ben Greenfield Life Show gets, the bigger and better the guests get, and the better the content I'm able to deliver to you. So hit subscribe, leave a ranking, leave a review if you got a little extra time. It means way more than you might think. Thank you so much.